In our headlines on this Thursday afternoon, June 13th, here on the peninsula, South Korea and Kazakhstan ink an agreement to allow the former firms to explore for critical minerals in the Central Asian state amid efforts to diversify supply chains. Meanwhile, at the UN Security Council, a public meeting on North Korea's appalling human rights violations takes place amid much opposition from the regime's traditional allies, China and Russia. And policymakers at the US Federal Reserve say they are holding their benchmark interest rates steady at 5.25 to 5.5% for the seventh session in a row, while sharing prospects of a single rate cut this year. We start in Astana, where the leaders of South Korea and Kazakhstan reaffirmed their commitment to bolster strategic partnership in diverse arenas during their summit talks back on Wednesday. Our senior correspondent Oh Soo-young files this report.
South Korea and Kazakhstan have agreed to work together to secure energy, resources and critical mineral supplies, inking bilateral deals to bolster their strategic partnership. This came on Wednesday as President Yoon and his Kazakh counterpart Kassym-Jomart Tokayev held a summit in Astana and oversaw the signing of 11 memorandums of understanding.
우리 두 정상은 세계적인 복합 위기와 불확실성에 직면한 오늘날 글로벌 중추국가를 지향하는 한국과 새로운 카자흐스탄 건설을 추구하는 카자흐스탄 간의 협력이 그 어느 때보다 중요하다는 데 의견을 같이 했습니다. 이를 위해 우리 두 정상은 전략적 동반자 관계를 더욱 호혜적이고 미래지향적인 파트너십으로 키워나가기로 했습니다.
More than 700 companies in Kazakhstan with Korean capital are operating successfully. Going forward, we are interested in strengthening cooperation in the fields of infrastructure, industry, finance, energy, environment, automotive, aerospace, AI and electronics.
According to their joint statement, the two sides agreed to further energy cooperation, with Kazakhstan to continue supplying Korea with uranium and crude oil, and consider the possibility of increasing uranium supplies. They also agreed to cooperate on power generation, with South Korea seeking to help its firms secure power plant modernization and renewable energy projects in Kazakhstan. Also, as South Korea is in need of critical minerals to back its foremost high-tech industries, such as semiconductors, Seoul signed a deal to foster partnerships with Kazakhstan across the entire cycle of exploration, mining and smelting of major minerals, including lithium. They will also provide opportunities for Korean firms to participate in prioritized fields of development and production of minerals. Further deals will support collaborations on Kazakhstan's national infrastructure projects. The summit also laid the groundwork for future-oriented cooperation through knowledge sharing for development policies and increasing training and exchanges of talents in science, technology and ICT. To jointly respond to climate change, Seoul and Astana will cooperate on greenhouse gas reduction projects and forestry. People-to-people exchanges is another focal point, with Kazakhstan being home to some 120,000 ethnic Koreans. The two sides agreed to boost exchanges in culture, tourism, education and sport, and resume direct flights from Astana to Incheon. As they strengthen solidarity on various fronts, Seoul and Astana also discussed regional and global security. They called for the denuclearization of North Korea, deeming it a necessary step for global peace and stability, and urging the regime to cease its provocations. Kazakhstan, with its history of nuclear disarmament, supported Yoon's audacious initiative of offering economic benefits for the North's denuclearization. Going forward, the two leaders expressed their will to continue their summit exchanges, with Tokayev accepting Yoon's invitation to visit Korea. Yoon, since Monday, has been on a week-long tour of 3 Central Asian countries.
Marking 15 years of their strategic partnership, the two sides agreed to reinforce and broaden their cooperation to the regional level, to back South Korea's new K-Silk Road initiative to engage with Central Asian countries in economic security, development and culture. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News, Astana.
And summit talks between South Korea and Kazakhstan were followed by a business forum and a cultural event. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon has more.
Following the summit between South Korea and Kazakhstan on Wednesday, President Yoon and President Kasim-Jomart Tokayev joined a business forum in Astana to solidify summit discussions. President Yoon re-emphasized cooperation to stabilize a supply chain for critical minerals, with Kazakhstan possessing the necessary resources and South Korea having the technology to process those minerals and manufacture chips and batteries.
핵심 광물 탐사부터 개발, 가공, 수요 산업에 이르기까지 양국 간 협력 잠재력이 무궁무진합니다. 이번에 구축된 핵심 광물 공급망 파트너십을 바탕으로 핵심 광물 전반에 걸친 협력이 본격화될 것입니다.
With 300 business leaders and government officials at the forum, 24 MOUs and agreements were also signed. 4 of them were related to natural resources and energy cooperation, such as for searching for lithium and its development. Another MOU was about expanding Korean automobile companies' production in the Central Asian country. This is a field that the two countries are looking to expand cooperation as Kazakhstan is planning to develop its manufacturing capacity.
제조업 강국인 한국은 카자흐스탄 정부가 역점을 두고 추진하는 제조 발전 전략의 핵심 파트너가 될 것입니다.
The Kazakh president, noting that around 700 South Korean companies are already in the Kazakh market, emphasized the importance of South Korea's role in the global economy as a whole and vowed to support South Korean companies running business there.
I am confident that today's forum will breathe new life into the synergy of cooperative efforts between the two countries. Today, we have also expressed our full support for Korea's K-Silk Road initiative in Kazakhstan.
The two leaders put aside business afterward and shared cultural performances from the two countries, symbolizing the long-standing relationship and shared history between the two countries. With around 600 people in the audience, the performers included more than 100 Korean and Kazakh artists. Among the Kazakh artists were Koryo Saram, or ethnic Koreans in Central Asia, who performed Korean traditional dances. 김도현, Arirang News.
Right, and as mentioned by my colleague Kim Do-yeon, the phrase Koryo Saram refers to the ethnic Koreans living in Central Asia who have been praised for playing a crucial role in laying the bridge between South Korea and the region. Our Song Yu-jin shares the story.
The term Koryo Saram, meaning Koryo people, has two meanings. One refers to those who lived in the ancient Koryo kingdom on the Korean peninsula around 1,000 years ago. The other refers to ethnic Koreans who lived in the former Soviet Union and their descendants. Currently, there are around 500,000 Koryo Saram worldwide, with approximately 300,000 residing in Central Asia.
They call themselves Koryo Saram because they came from Korea before it was divided into North and South. The name Korea is derived from Koryo, also romanized as Koryo.
The first records of Koryo Saram date back to 1864 when, due to economic hardships, around 60 Koreans from Hamgyongdo province crossed the Tumen River to settle in Russia's Far East Primorsky Krai. Historians say this marked the start of Korean emigration. More people continued to move to the region, but in 1937, under Soviet leader Joseph Stalin's orders, over 200,000 Koryo Saram suspected of being Japanese spies were deported to Central Asia.
Forced relocation to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan was treacherous. In the initial years, mortality rates were high, especially among children and the elderly, due to the cold, harsh weather, and lack of necessary infrastructure.
Despite these challenges, Koryo Saram persevered through what experts call their diligence. Working on collective farms known as koholds, they earned recognition and respect in their new homelands. Over time, many broadened their roles in society, becoming doctors, lawyers, teachers, and scientists.
The strong commitment of Koryo Saram to education was truly remarkable. They did everything they could to send their children to college, and if possible, even abroad to places like Moscow. Rather than staying in farming, these parents relentlessly pushed their children to pursue higher education.
What also makes Koryo Saram unique is how they preserve their Korean heritage and identity.
Their identity is maintained not through the most common ways of religion or language, but through traditional cultural practices. Even today, many Koryo Saram families follow traditional Korean customs in their daily lives, such as funeral ceremonies, often more intricately than those living in Korea, maintaining a sense of connection to their heritage.
Having endured more than a century-long journey of resilience and cultural preservation, Koryo Saram serve as a bridge between Korea and Central Asia. 송유진, Arirang News.
And in other news, South Korea and its allies sought to redirect attention to North Korea's appalling human rights abuses at the UN Security Council earlier on Wednesday. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
Last August, the UN Security Council held a meeting to discuss North Korea's human rights violations. A meeting to discuss such issues at the UNSC at the time was the first of its kind in 6 years, as Seoul, Washington, and others shed light on the fact that Pyongyang has been using its scarce resources to fund its weapons of mass destruction programs instead of helping the heavily impoverished people of North Korea. Fast forward 10 months later to Wednesday, where under the rotating presidency of South Korea, the UNSC once again convened a meeting in New York to bring to attention the plight of North Koreans and its security implications. South Korea's ambassador to the UN, Hwang Jung-guk, presiding over the open meeting, stressed that the North Korean regime wants to keep the people in the dark and try to repulse the outside light with their draconian control and nuclear weapons. He further emphasized that if human rights violations stop in the reclusive state, nuclear weapons development will also stop, adding that the global community needs to look at North Korea's human rights situation from the perspective of international peace and security. The meeting, however, was met with opposition from North Korea's traditional allies in China and Russia. The Russian ambassador to the UN slammed the meeting, saying that while the global community looks toward the UNSC with the hope that it will resolve complicated global issues, it is squandering resources on a discussion of groundless and blatantly politicized matters. China's ambassador to UN reiterated Beijing's stance that the Council is not the proper venue to address human rights issues. Before the start of the meeting, 57 UN member states and the delegation of the European Union issued a joint statement calling on all UN members to work together to bring concrete change that will improve the lives of North Koreans and contribute to a more peaceful and secure world. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the Yoon administration says Russian President Vladimir Putin is indeed planning to visit North Korea. Speaking to members of the traveling press pool in Astana Wednesday evening, an official with the South Korean presidential delegation confirmed Mr. Putin's upcoming agenda, adding that it will take place within, quote, a few days. Pundits believe military collaboration between Moscow and Pyongyang will be further addressed during this upcoming summit. Meanwhile, over in the U.S., Deputy Secretary of State Kurt Campbell claimed the Biden administration, for its part, is carefully monitoring Pyongyang-Moscow ties. Government authorities here and ruling party lawmakers are planning to crack down on illicit short selling in hopes of better protecting individual investors. Now, during talks on this Thursday with market insiders, a broad agreement was reached on a new digital system to better detect short selling and to raise its legal consequences depending on the amount of wrongfully obtained profits. Short selling refers to the practice of seeking to profit off debts that a stock will fall. Meanwhile, the ruling party also called for an extension of the current government ban on short selling to next March to allow for adequate time to implement the new measures. A ban on short selling imposed late last year is due to expire this month. U.S. monetary policymakers are holding their interest rates steady for the 7th session in a row and have shared prospects of just one rate cut within the year. Park Gonu reports.
The U.S. Federal Reserve has maintained its benchmark interest rates once again and is forecasting fewer rate cuts to happen this year than earlier predicted. In a two-day Federal Open Market Committee meeting which ended on Wednesday local time, the committee decided unanimously to keep key interest rates at the 5.25 to 5.5% range. This was the 7th consecutive meeting where the Fed has kept its interest rates at the same level, the highest since 2001. The gap between South Korea's interest rates remained the same with a 2 percentage point difference. The Fed's decision came after U.S. Labor Department released its Consumer Price Index for May earlier in the day. The CPI in May saw an on-year increase of 3.3%, slowing down 0.1% from the previous month. Core CPI, excluding volatile food and energy prices, was up by 3.4% on year, which was 0.1% lower than previous estimates. Though Fed Chair Jerome Powell called the recent inflation report a good reading, he said it would take longer to get the confidence needed for the Fed to loosen its policy.
The most recent inflation readings have been more favorable than earlier in the year, however, and there has been modest further progress toward our inflation objective. We'll need to see more good data to bolster our confidence that inflation is moving sustainably toward 2%.
Also on Wednesday, the Fed predicted that there could be a single rate cut before the end of the year. That's different from its forecast made in March, when 3 rate cuts were predicted. As there are 4 FOMC meetings left in 2024, watchers are now focusing on whether the Fed will cut interest rates before the presidential election in November. Park Go-nu, Arirang News.
Chinese electric vehicles may face additional import tariffs of 38.1% in the European market. According to the European Union on Wednesday, the move comes amid concerns over subsidies offered to Chinese EV makers by their government that keep their prices, quote, artificially low. Accordingly, the EU will have in place 5 tariff levels from July 5th, with car makers that cooperate with investigators to see tariffs of 21% and those who do not to face tariffs of 38.1%. Now, these tariffs come on top of the existing 10% tax on imported cars to the EU. Whether or not the plan will become permanent will be decided by November. Back on the local front, the number of foreign tourists to South Korea is on the rise. According to the Korea Tourism Organization on this Thursday, over 4.8 million foreign travelers were here in Korea between January and April this year. Now, this is up some 87% on year. What's more, the number of guests from Taiwan and the U.S. has already surpassed levels logged back in 2019. While the number of travelers from neighboring Japan and China has yet to fully recover, data shows on-year improvements of over 85% and 470% respectively. Korea is hoping to attract a total of 20 million foreign tourists this year amid expanded international flight routes. Korea is renowned for its gaming culture and hosts one of the biggest esports markets in the world. That being said, in this next report, we take a look at its journey from simple entertainment to cultural phenomenon with celebrity status for its players. Our Yoon reports.
Esports is no longer just about playing or watching the games. It's about belonging to a community, celebrating shared passions, and embracing a new form of cultural expression. Established in 2018, Seoul's Esports Hall of Fame is the world's only venue dedicated to the history of esports, in particular the 20-year journey in South Korea. It is operated by the country's Culture Ministry and Korea Esports Association.
We aim to boost student engagement in esports and establish standardized regulations for esports to sustain our leading global position.
At the 2022 Asian Games, which took place last year, League of Legends was featured as an official medal sport for the first time, with South Korea clinching the gold. In addition to the South Korean team's impressive skills, the intense passion of fans was also notable. What cultural factors might contribute to this phenomenon? A professor of game studies says that in the late 1990s, as South Korea surged as a global IT powerhouse, the culture of PCbang, or internet cafes for gaming, became prevalent. However, he said there are other elements to the phenomenon driven by younger generations.
A new trend called JOMO, or joy of missing out, is gaining traction beyond FOMO, which means fear of missing out. It's about focusing on what you enjoy rather than worrying about what others are doing. Esports is something understood among the younger generations.
And of course there's Faker, the South Korean living legend of esports, inspiring fans worldwide. He was crowned the first ever inductee into the Hall of Legends, a recognition introduced by the developer of League of Legends, Riot Games, this year. A promotional hall in Seoul has turned into a Faker temple, honoring his contribution to the esports scene.
Here at the special tribute area, fans expressed their reverence for Lee Sang-yeok, also known as Faker. This worshipping zone shows the profound inspiration Faker ignites within his fans.
Among women born in 1996, I love my wife the most, and among men is Faker. I think Faker's unwavering consistency stands out the most.
Regardless of the outcome of matches, Faker is known for his steadfast attitude to never giving up and unwavering focus on his gaming career. And such attributes serve as examples for the younger generations.
As a longtime fan of Faker, I'm really interested in checking out the books he recommends.
Something that was once simply considered only a game, then transitioned into a sport, and has now evolved into a cultural phenomenon. Yoon-Hee, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at the latest news in the world now. The US has announced new sanctions on Russia ahead of the G7 summit in Italy, as 4 Russian military vessels, including a Navy frigate and a nuclear-powered submarine, arrived in Cuba in what is seen as a show of force. US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, aboard Air Force One en route to Italy, told reporters that more than 300 new sanctions are being introduced, largely focused on deterring Russia from obtaining key technologies through individuals and companies from countries such as China, the UAE and Turkey. Meanwhile, only 150 kilometers from US soil, a fleet of Russian Navy vessels reached Cuba after conducting high-precision missile weapons training in the Atlantic Ocean. A US official speaking to the Associated Press called it a routine port call that posed no threat to the United States. However, Russia's visit is seen as a show of force, as well as a reminder that Russia has allies in the region, including Cuba and Venezuela. In Argentina, riot police on Wednesday used water cannons and tear gas to disperse protesters outside the country's Congress ahead of a vote on proposals by President Javier Milei. Thousands of protesters gathered in downtown Buenos Aires to urge lawmakers to reject Milei's agenda of economic deregulation and harsh austerity. Amid the chaos, senators began debating a tax reform that lowers the income tax threshold and a 238-article state reform bill. Outside the Congress, demonstrations started as a carnival atmosphere, but became more violent with police water cannons and tear gas used against protesters who threw Molotov cocktails at bikes and cars on the streets. Police reported that 15 protesters were arrested and at least 20 police officers were injured. US-based Bark Air, the dog-friendly airline that announced its maiden flight in May, has added 5 new destinations to its portfolio. The company said Wednesday that it will now offer flights to Paris, France, and expand its domestic service to Chicago, San Francisco, Phoenix, and Miami. That's in addition to its current services to New York, Los Angeles, and London. The dog-first airline provides services such as speedy check-ins, doggy champagne, and options for an on-flight spa experience. Kim Seong, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. The heat wave continues to blast across much of Korea with more regions under heat advisories. But at least those in East Coast regions, including Gangneung, will get nice relief from the searing heat this afternoon. But the rest of the country needs to brace for the season's hottest temperatures this afternoon under burning sunshine. Northern parts of Gyeongsang-Bukdo, however, could see 5 to 20 millimeters of passing rain today. Have some protection items ready, bright sunshine will boost UV rays to very high levels during the hottest parts of the day. And please pay attention to the risk of hot and sunny weather if you have to work outside today. Seoul and Daejeon get up to 32 degrees Celsius, but nice and comfortable over on Jeju at 27 degrees. Now, those of us in the capital area need to get ready for even hotter temperatures for tomorrow before the heat relief on Saturday. And next week should not be as hot as this week. With that in mind, let's take a look at the international weather conditions.
Right, and that ends Thursday's afternoon newscast. Coming up next is our daily panel session.